All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Corey Brunkow. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this Horizon 3.ai webinar on the true impact on your organization when an employee is phished. So I'll get started here directly. We've got a all-star cast here and a nice agenda for you. I'll start with some introductions. I'll introduce the talent that's going to brief you and show you this phishing impact test that we recently released. We'll do a demonstration of the test in our user interface, and then we'll discuss some key takeaways and considerations in risk management with regard to phishing and the impact on your organization. And then we should have plenty of time for questions and answers. And then any time after the webinar or as you see the recording, please hit us up at horizon3.ai for any other questions or concerns or thoughts on this topic. So I'm your host. I'm Corey Brunkow. I'm the Director of Engineering. I'm an Army veteran in special operations, and I've got education you can see there. My background's in mechanical engineering, but my experience is in infantry operations and security. And so it's my pleasure to introduce the real talent on this team, which is Naveen Sankavalli, our chief architect and an offensive security professional. He's got vast experience ranging from software development through pen testing. He's got patents, and he's found and discovered and disclosed over 20 CVEs. He does that for us on a routine basis, and he's one of our chief architects with regard to our attack content and the product as a whole. Joining us also is Noah King. He's a senior offensive security engineer. He also has enjoyed time instructing coding boot camps and instructing at cybersecurity boot camps. Also spent some time on the red team SRT with SINAC. And so these two guys are going to bring us through, talking us through the content with regard to why phishing is important, how we display it in our user interface, and what it means to you as a company to execute an effective phishing campaign, and using our NodeZero impact test to make it more effective and useful for your overall security strategy. So I'll pass over to Naveen, and we'll talk through why the NodeZero phishing impact test.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so why did we develop the NodeZero phishing impact test? So first of all, let's talk about phishing. So it's pretty much universally accepted that phishing is a major threat to all organizations, small and large. So there's three primary ways that attackers get initial access into environments. So those are stolen or compromised credentials, exploitation of public services, like the recent ConnectWise vulnerability or the Ivanti VPN vulnerabilities. So just exploitation of vulnerabilities or misconfigurations. And the third is phishing. And so in the last Verizon data breach report, they identified that phishing was involved in 36% of data breaches. So it's generally accepted that phishing is a major problem. And because of that, one of the core components of any security program is using phishing simulation tools. And so we use these at Horizon 3. We have an IT security team. They run routine phishing tests every month. And what these tests do is they raise awareness among employees about the threat of phishing. They make them hyper vigilant, looking out for phishing emails, not clicking on phishing links and so forth. And then as a security team, you can then drive towards making employees better and better over time, continually reminding them of the threat of phishing, making sure it's top of mind for them. Now, this is really good and important. There are some blind spots, though, with phishing simulation tools. So that's what we're going to talk about, and this is where the NodeZero phishing impact test can really help. So first of all, if you think from a risk perspective, phishing simulation tests do a pretty good job of identifying the likelihood that an employee is going to be phished. You can run this campaigns monthly, quarterly basis, and you can see how many employees clicked on a link, how many entered credentials into a login form, and so forth. But the other part of the risk equation is impact. So if you want to really truly understand what the risk is for phishing to your organization, you need to understand what is the impact of an employee getting phished. And so that's where NodeZero can help. NodeZero is a continuous security testing platform. And so what we've developed with the phishing impact test is a way to tie a phishing simulation into continuous security testing. And Noah's going to do a demo and talk about that in detail. The second thing I want to say is that from an attacker perspective, I personally believe phishing is just going to become more and more of a threat over time. So looking at the type of tooling that is developing actively, so we know that generative AI technologies have taken off in the last year or two. And there are reports even Microsoft put out a recent report where they're tracking real threat actors using generative AI technologies to create convincing phishing emails and messages. And so some of the traditional cues that people are trained to look for, like, improper grammar and that kind of stuff, those cues are not going to be relevant for much longer, in my opinion. Phishing emails and messages are going to get really convincing. The second is there's a whole suite of tools out there that attackers have to use that will bypass MFA, right? So it's commonly accepted that external endpoints, you should have MFA enabled on them. But there's good tools out there, and it's called adversary in the middle techniques that attackers can use to lure employees into not only clicking a link and entering credentials, but also giving up their MFA tokens and then basically getting session cookies to access different services. And these are becoming more and more prevalent and more convincing as well. So in my opinion, it's not really a matter of if an employee gets phished, right? You can cut the likelihood as much as possible through training, but really it's a matter of when. Like, someone will get phished in your organization at some point. So what can you do to understand the impact and take action on the impact side while reducing the likelihood side with phishing simulation tools? So I'll hand off to Noah and he can do a walkthrough of that.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Make sure I have the right one. Hello, everybody. My name is Noah King, senior engineer here at Horizon 3 AI. So let me go ahead. I want to kind of take y'all all through a demo and show what we've built. It's really cool. It's fun. I think phishing is a very interesting concept. And as you start to use the tool, it's also fun just to kind of phish users and kind of fix these problems. So the first thing, let's jump into an actual phishing scenario, right? I have a phishing page on the left. On the left is just a template that I've made. It's just HTML. You can always use all the different phishing tools that you want. There are a lot of different phishing templates out there that you can get, or you can make your own. So there's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of customization you can do. You can go pretty far with phishing templates. So I have one here for a company called Encryptologic, fake company name. And let's just imagine that we are the phishing admin who's running this campaign for the business Encryptologic. So I've built out what at least looks to me and to my company a believable login page that a lot of employees typically log into. Maybe I sent them a phishing email that says, hey, you're about to lose access in the next 48 hours. And you should log in with a new password and everything. So all the users, they flock to this page and they fill it out. So let's go ahead, let's just try that. I've already done a test one as well. I always recommend when you run a phishing test, do a test one yourself, just to make sure you've hooked it up. But if I go ahead and type in an email, let's imagine that I am Ethan, the IT guy, right? He's a new IT intern, doesn't really have a lot of permissions, I would say, but he's on the IT side, so he's working help desk. Maybe he can do some low-level help desk things. Ethan comes over here, he fills out his password thinking this is legit. Oh no, incorrect login creds, enter your info again. So this is actually one of the first tricks that we've actually employed into the phishing template. It works pretty much with any login page too. So all the functionality I'm showing would work for you as well on your pages. So Ethan hit it, submitted his credential. Over on the right, we already see that the Ethan credential was injected into NodeZero. I'm sitting on this side with a real-time view of NodeZero. So NodeZero is running on my business network. It's hooked up to let this phish cred pass into this pen test. So immediately, somebody just fell for it real time, put in a password, submitted it, and it's already turned green. Credential is phished, it's validated. So if it turns green, it's a valid cred. If it's blue, it's trying to validate it. It might not. This was a test one, so it's fake. It's not going to validate in the actual network or on Active Directory or Entra, things like that. Now let's imagine, though, another thing. So this invalid creds. One thing that we found just by doing this little red text of incorrect password, people give us so many variations. They give us multiple usernames. They give us married names, maiden names. I've seen it all. They give us different combos of passwords. So they keep trying different variations. So you would think that you might also only be vulnerable by maybe they gave one cred. I've seen many users give 10, 15, 20 creds, come back the next day and try again. The level of persistence and creds that you can collect is pretty impressive. So Ethan is an example, IT intern. What about Ava? Ava's on the marketing or the HR side of things. You're doing the security testing, but always there's new employees that are being brought into the organization. There are people who get a lot of emails. They don't look at every link. They don't notice that it's a malicious phishing email. So Ava falls for it. And then finally, Michael falls for it. And so every time somebody's getting phished, you can stagger this out. You can run this pen test for up to 30 days. So with a regular phishing campaign, you'll just integrate this right into your phishing tools, such as KnowBe4, some of the other phishing tools, or a homegrown solution. Really works with anything. At this point, we see all the creds come in as they get phished. And immediately NodeZero starts using them. So let me just kind of walk you through. I'm going to hide this login page, but we saw 3 people get phished. What is NodeZero doing right now? Well, right now, the things that are in progress, we're running Cyanide. We're running a C2 server. We're trying to dump secrets, and there's some more modules and everything. These are all the different commands that we're actually running with NodeZero that's running in the environment. We can start to see that at least Ethan has been verified, Ava and Michael, nothing's been verified, but we also have notable events. And what's cool about the notable events is you can immediately see there was a credential for the user Michael, which was compromised through a successful phishing attack. And as we start to look at some of these other users, let's go down to maybe Ethan. So Ethan was compromised through a successful phishing attack. We already logged in. Let's see, let me search for Ethan. We logged into the domain controller to verify and list out the shares that Ethan has access to. And we were able to prove that's the domain user. Now, Ethan's just a domain user. He's not a domain admin. He doesn't have access to everything. Same thing with Ava. And then finally, Michael is an admin, because I have seen admin or higher ups also fall for phishing. So nobody is immune, you could say. But here's the real-time view. As you're sitting here letting your phishing campaign run for that length of time, up to 30 days, you can sit here, you can log in, you can look at the credentials that you phished, and then you can already start to see some of the notable things that are happening. Now, let me take you a step back. Let's say the pen test is done. What all could we have done with that credential? So here's an example, the Phishing Impact test that I ran in January, and I have a February one. Let me zoom this in just a tad. And let's look at the Phishing Impact test from January. I ran it last month. Ava was phished. All right, so here's our phish credential summary. During the pen test, we had 3 phish credentials. I've seen hundreds get phished. It's very interesting. The more and more you get, and to see who has access to what. So Ava had credentialed access to 3 data resources, 33 data assets, had write access on some of them. This credential led to domain user compromise affecting Ava. So we at least compromised the domain user. That gave us access to more data in the network. Michael, this credential has a domain admin privilege. So of course, the access it has to data resources, assets, write access, and everything is way more big. That credential was in 25 attack paths for different things, including domain compromise. So you can start to see all the downstream effects. You have a domain admin get phished really bad. You have an intern, maybe not as bad, or an HR person, but there's different scenarios for each person that's phished. And that's one of the differences too. We don't always know what all does this credential have access to. Ethan, same thing. We can look at the resources, how many assets, and what it was able to do. Now, what's interesting though, this credential, so Ethan the intern, was used in 71 attack paths. It gave us a domain compromise affecting this domain. And if we didn't have him phished, 60% of what was found in this pen test wouldn't have happened. So immediately I already know, okay, well, if I just remediate Ethan's and these three really, and letting the user see or letting the people realize the impact of what it really leads to, I think it is a lot more impactful. Now, that's the summary page. I'll just, if you haven't used the UI as well, I'll give a little bit of an overview as well. You can download all the reports. So we report all this data as well. So it is downloadable for PDF, CSV, things like that. We have some top concepts at the very top. There's impacts. What impacts were done to the business? We phished a user and we were able to steal all your employee data, and now there's a data breach, right? What weaknesses, what CVEs or different attack techniques and exploits did we use to get to an impact? What credentials were used? AD password audit is for auditing your Active Directory, and then data, hosts, services, all the other things that we find. Now, what's interesting is you can filter in a way of just phished creds. Show me all the results that are downstream from a phished credential. So all of these 96 attack paths, 5 different types of impacts. We had domain compromise, we had ransomware exposures, we had sensitive data exposed, we got 9 domain users from it, and we compromised 46 hosts. So as you look at it, you can start to see time to compromise, the length. These times will vary based on when users are getting phished and your campaign is staggered. But let's go ahead and let's just drill into one maybe. Let's drill into the first one. So you get a high level. The domain admin administrator was a domain compromise. How did we get there? We have narratives. We have proof, because we always like to provide proof of what we did. So here we can see is Ethan logging in and listing the shares on his domain. Now, Ethan wasn't a domain admin, so we were able to use other paths. And I think what's the best way is showing you the attack path. There's a lot more detail, but let's look at the attack path. NodeZero started on the network in this IP. We phished the credential of Ethan. We were able to compromise Ethan as a domain user. Turns out that there was also a CVE, print nightmare, any other CVE that's trending or CISA that you want to insert here. We implanted our RAT, or our remote access tool. So we implanted a RAT right onto the Windows process. It's running a system. So there, from that point, we can dump LSAS. We could dump SAM. We could dump all of those Windows directories with passwords. In the process of dumping LSAS, we got an NTLM hash, which was the administrator account, which is a very common technique. Once you get system on a Windows machine, there's usually administrator hashes. That led us to eventually, by exhausting all paths and doing reuse with NodeZero, it was able to come to domain admin. And it took 1 hour and 10 minutes, but from the phish cred to the domain admin, about 30 minutes or so. I don't know if I could do that as fast when I'm pen testing manually, but that's an example, right? So the speed is another thing to also keep in mind. We can achieve domain admin or domain compromise in as little as 2 minutes. So there's a lot of different facts and figures. So that's the impacts. Let's also look at the weaknesses. What weaknesses were resulted from phish creds? Windows print spooler, print nightmare was one. Some more print nightmare. We can filter and sort all the data based on the weakness ID, based on the host. We have 5 print nightmares, credential dumping a SAM, LSAS. We had certified. So a lot of credential reuse. and everything like that. Now, what's finally, I think the most interesting too is kind of looking at phished users, their creds, what it leads to. So we can also filter all of our credentials that NodeZero has captured to phish creds only. This implant of LSAS dump, this came from a phish cred. That's our biggest cred that we were able to get, as well as cyber user, Michael, and Ethan led to that. So those were all big, right? Some were phishing or downstream from phishing, meaning phishing got us to the next point, and it's all chained. Let's just say, all right, let's look at Ethan. We really need to investigate, how did Ethan blow up the entire network and get us domain admin? What did we do we configure something wrong? Where's the issues? So we can start to look into the credential. We can see what access they have, what resources, a lot of C drives, admin, guest, admin, certain role, help desk, HR. So maybe we can evaluate, does he have the right access to all of these, or can we, lock that down? Also do some training with Ethan as well. We can see some of the services that we were able to access with Ethan's cred, and a lot of the downstream impacts that came from his cred. And of course, here's the cred. It's masked. We want to show the first and last character, so we don't expose anything sensitive in the portal. There's always attack graphs and proof for everything that we do as well. So I'm going to pause there because we went through a lot. We showed the phishing page where somebody entered it. It was a running pen test. The creds came in. We also saw a finished pen test. And now you're probably wondering, how do I set it up? I want to run one myself. I want to do it. Let me try. First thing, if you want to try it out, we have the link at the end of the slide. It's also in the invite, Horizon 3 AI, Phishing Impact testing. You can read, you can watch a shorter video, you can kind of look at all the info. Click the big red free trial button. And if you upgrade your account, you have to use a business email. You can try out phishing as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just click run a pen test, that big blue button, run a pen test. And we have a lot of different pen test types. We're always adding more. Phishing is the one that we want. In this case, we're just going to give it a scope, right? I think for me, my scope was 10.0.21/1.24. So I'm just going to give it this this CIDR range there. I only want the 10s. I can also exclude things if I want. I can make my own templates, so you can set up phishing templates the way that you like to use them and everything, but I gave it scope. Open source intelligence, are there any domains, company names? Like we'll add, well, this is Encryptologic. So maybe we'll add encryptologic.com. And then we know that Encryptologic is their company name, and maybe they have a short name or something. You can give it weak password terms. AWS or Git will also try to go out into the cloud, get accounts, things like that. The attack configuration, this is where you can kind of turn all the knobs and levers. This is not everything that NodeZero does. These are just things that we allow you to control. A lot more still happens in the background. But we've already tailored the template to what we think is a good fit for phishing. So we're going to try to brute force domain users. We're going to spray passwords. We're going to try to pivot to Azure AD, also known as MS Intra, with that credential. Maybe we can get into your cloud environment from a phish cred. Domain users, credential reuse, scanning SMB shares to find sensitive data, and then other exploits with Active Directory, cracking hashes, dumping SAS, LSA, SAM, using the RAT, and then man-in-the-middle techniques and a few exploits as well. So overall, you can just leave it as is, or you can, get a little more granular if you want. Here, you just need to pick a runtime. How long does this pen test run? So if I'm going to run a phishing campaign and it's over the course of 2 weeks, well, maybe I need to do it for, 14 days, right? So keep it similar to how long your phishing campaign is going to be. Don't set a 1-hour runtime or anything like that. Once we run the pen test and agree to all the legal jargon, you're going to be given a script to deploy phishing. So you just click that button, copy it, and then this is where you go to your phishing pages. In my case, I pulled some off the internet, off of KnowBe4. You can use KnowBe4 or any of your phishing tools. The thing that you're looking for is really login pages, right? That's the type of template you want. You can also Google phishing templates from GitHub. There's a lot of different templates out there. So you don't have to make them all from scratch. You can find a bunch of different businesses that are believable, and it's really easy to get you going. So if I go back to the code, I have this login page. Let me just remind you where we're at. This is my phishing login page. Encrypted logic, we made it look like it's part of the business. And then I just drop in my script. We're going to give you a script tag, which is JavaScript. So JavaScript's going to run in the HTML. When the user opens the login page, our JavaScript's going to run in the background and shuttle credentials back to NodeZero. So that's kind of how it works at a high level. There is a couple of things to be aware of, though, because right when you paste it in, you're not going to just have a blank screen like that. It's going to look more like this. It's going to have a big red banner. Horizon 3 AI phishing test mode is enabled. Disable the test mode in JavaScript before you begin your campaign, and it shows you the credentials. The username is equal to this, password is equal to that. So what I can do, let me swap back actually. I need to test it. We need to make sure that this is actually hooked up and going to communicate properly with NodeZero. A lot of login pages, a lot of HTML sometimes use different form names and values. Our template is set up to detect a lot of them, but sometimes you need to test it and just validate. You might have to make a one-line change or something. So I'm going to fill out one as if I was being phished, hit submit, it turns green. If it's green, it works. So you can go back to your code, first line, set the test mode enabled, false. Just change it to false, go back, refresh. You're good to go. This is a live armed phishing template. You can go shoot that off at users in your phishing app or in your phishing campaign. So just to do a test, you can always submit one yourself or junk one. I like to do that just to make sure that it's all coming in. And then finally, you'll deploy NodeZero into the network or the environment. So that's the Docker container running in the network, and then everything will be hooked up and communicated. So right now the pen test is still spinning up, so we're not going to see the credential yet, but in general, that's how you set it up. You can also, of course, once you have the JavaScript, you can modify it if you feel comfortable. You can turn off that incorrect credentials error too. If you don't want that to show up, you can just change that to false as well. So you have a little bit of customization. One thing to be aware of though, is this is per pen test. So if you set it up this time, every time you run a phishing campaign right now, you set up a new template. They have special API keys to prevent unwanted people from tampering with the pen test. Everything is destroyed. It's just part of security at this point. So from a general flow, we saw a lot. That's really the entire demo. We saw the real-time view, users get phished, we saw the results, and then we saw how to set it up. So if you want to go ahead and try it out, again, you can go back to this page. But other than that, Corey and Naveen, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. Great layout. I love the trickiness of entering the credentials multiple times, and then obviously the impact is the value to the NodeZero user. So we've got a couple questions that came in. Naveen, do you want to talk through how long the captured data is stored?
Yeah, so this applies for all of our security tests, so that data is stored as long as the test is running. But it's stored in a isolated environment. So the way all of our security tests work is we provision temporary infrastructure that is network isolated and has those credentials being used during the course of that test. And then as soon as the test is over, all that stuff is torn down. The credentials are destroyed. And so what you see in the end in terms of reporting is just the masked credentials, so not the actual raw values, which we don't store outside of the actual test itself in an isolated infrastructure.
Thanks, Naveen. One other question that came through was asking about the integration with KnowBe4. So is there an integration with KnowBe4 or an API, or maybe this is a one back for Noah about the setup of the phish and the opportunity to use KnowBe4 or other tools that security teams are already using to run phishing campaigns?
Yeah, so in regards to that, you can use KnowBe4. You can use all these different phishing tools, right? Um, those tools also capture analytics and data, so you have it from that point on their side. So anytime somebody interacts with a KnowBe4 link, you can know who's opening it and things like that. We currently don't have like an API integration, but we also capture our own metrics, report on our own data, and everything. There are plans to do an integration hopefully in the future, and everything like that. As far as doing more, we can do a lot more with this too and capture a lot more analytics. We could start alerting how many users just clicked on the link and the page was launched or abandoned. We can get into a lot more tactics and techniques, but in general, a lot of these tools, they have reporting in it. We have reporting. There is somewhat of blending them together. That's still somewhat in the works, but you do have the analytics from your tools as well.
Yeah, so if I can just answer that as well. So first of all, there's a question about which phishing products are supported. And so we designed this integration in such a way that we're generally agnostic to the tool you use. So we use KnowBe4 and Horizon 3, but this will work just as well for Proofpoint or any other kind of off-the-shelf tools, because all that's required is being able to put in some JavaScript into a landing page. And pretty much all of these tools work in a similar way to enable that. In terms of the integration itself, we have an API on our side, so all of the data that comes back at the end of a test can be fetched from an API. We haven't automated an integration into any specific phishing tool or vice versa from a phishing tool into us. If you guys have use cases around that, we'd love to hear it. That we just released this phishing test this month itself. So that's an area that we're actively exploring, is the reporting side. And where it makes sense to do that reporting is in the phishing tool or some other tool that's used for risk reporting. So love to hear from you all about specific things that you'd want to report up and how we can help.
Thanks, Naveen. I think great job on the demonstration there, Noah. We do have some real world attack paths to cover here that might be interesting for the users to see, as Naveen explained some of the impacts of credentials that have been phished over the last 30 days or so.
Yeah. So we just really made this test mainstream this month, and so we've had clients use the phishing test, and we've already been starting to surface some interesting impacts as a result. So one simple result you can imagine is that once NodeZero captures a credential, figuring out what that credential has access to, right? So it's not really just about permissions, but actually taking those users' credentials and logging into different places, and then seeing what kind of data is accessible. And so in this one phishing test, a phished user's credentials led to finding PCI data in a share. And so this is a really significant impact. There's not a lot of pivoting or anything like that, but you can see that that credential directly led to access to very sensitive data, and that's important to know from an impact side. The second one here shows an example. Again, this is a real world test where a phished credential led to privilege escalation. It's actually very similar to the attack path that Noah just demonstrated in the demo, but this actually happened recently. So a phished credential was used to then exploit Print Nightmare on another host in the network. And through that exploitation, NodeZero installed a remote access tool running a system on that host, and then executed some commands through the implant to dump LSAS, and then got access to a service account credential, which was then logged into the domain with that credential, and that was a higher privilege credential. So this is another example of using a phished credential to escalate privileges to other credentials, and that really ties into impact, right? So from the impact side, the biggest things that are possible are what data does this credential have access to? And what are the escalation paths from this credential to getting to other users? And so these two attack paths demonstrate that. So because the access to other users then enables access to more data and then more users and so forth. And so it kind of snowballs from there.
Yeah, thanks, Naveen. I think this diagram is really effective in telling that story of, right now, users out there are running their phishing campaigns, and you usually end up with some additional security training or, hey, watch a video. What if the impact of being phished in one of these mock phishing campaigns was to be explained to this attack path and show, look, you're doing real damage to the company and the business bottom line when you fall for these campaigns. I think that's a really cool takeaway.
All right, so let's talk about kind of the value of the phishing impact test that we're showing. So what are the kind of the takeaways? So use phishing simulation tools. You can get an idea of the likelihood of someone getting phished. And you can use those tools to improve and make sure you can cut down that likelihood as much as possible. Now, where Horizon 3 and NodeZero can help is enhancing security training, right? So everyone runs these simulations every month, every quarter. What are the true ramifications of a user getting phished in these simulation exercises? As Corey mentioned, a lot of the times they just turn into kind of checkbox, kind of slaps on the wrist. But by actually running through the motion like an attacker would, and then seeing what the impact is, that feedback can then be presented back to users to make that training more effective. The second is on the executive side in terms of risk, right? If you think about phishing risk, what this enables you to do is connect likelihood and impact and then tell a much better story of risk. And third, really driving action towards not just reducing phishing likelihood, but actually hardening your internal environments. As I mentioned earlier, it's becoming more and more of a case where it's not a matter of if someone gets phished, it's going to happen. It's when, right? So what can you do to harden your internal environments when someone gets phished? And so all of the kind of typical defense in depth security controls that you want to put in place, you can test that. So you got a simulated phishing campaign. You can tie that into a NodeZero continuous security test at the same time and kind of work an end-to-end adversary simulation.
Thanks, Naveen. There's an interesting question in the chat. I think Noah's going to answer it, but we might go back a slide. And if you want to explain this attack path regarding the password. So are we assuming the user is using the same domain login password as the credentials that were phished?
Yeah, so as far as those credentials go, we could assume that potentially a domain cred was used, but we've also had a lot of users give us multiple variations, and these variations could range from personal passwords to really however they manage their passwords, right, or whatever they supply. A lot of times we also do see password reuse as far as like company terms and things like that. But in this scenario, it was a domain cred that led to more compromise.
Thanks. And Naveen, this is a actual pen test example that's been obfuscated, obviously. All right. All right, with that, we've got a few more minutes left to answer any questions that come through, or Noah, if you've got any final thoughts here on the NodeZero phishing impact test.
Yeah, there was one question was, do all the attack vectors assume single factor off? Currently, they are single factor off. We've explored and we're thinking about different integrations to do more of that AI or adversary in the middle to where we could relay credentials through valid MFA and then be able to log in. Since it's just a new product, this is where we've started with, and we haven't gotten to that point yet. But that's a great idea as well.
Yeah, and to that point, there's a related question around, does NodeZero have a phishing capability? Not right now, but when we look at introducing adversary in the middle type of techniques, it would make sense for NodeZero to potentially put that in, because a lot of the off-the-shelf tools don't seem to support that very well. And so that's an area where we could put that into the product. But this was kind of the first go at this, really leveraging infrastructure that users already have for running phishing simulation tests, and piggybacking off that because there is complexity around, okay, I got to set up domains and set up my email filters and all that kind of stuff in a certain way. And that's already managed by a lot of companies through that phishing simulation program. So this is kind of a direct integration piggybacking off that. But as we get into more advanced phishing techniques, that's definitely interesting for us to look at.
All right, I think Naveen, you kind of answered the one question in there about do phishing campaigns get scooped up by email filtering services? I think in the setup of your KnowBe4 or your other tooling to run these phishing campaigns, I think the IT ops section can set the threshold for letting those emails pass through.
Yeah, I would just also add it's really a great way to also like shuttle phishing emails legitly because you're using KnowBe4, it's an adopted practice. So we really don't have to worry about setting up domains, them getting banned or things like that that typical phishers would have.
All right, Naveen, any final thoughts and we'll wrap it up.
Nothing else to add. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot for everybody that joined. I think this was one of our most watched webinars, and so we'll post this on the internet. And please join us at horizon3.ai and look for the phishing campaign. Click on the free trial, and you can try this out for yourself. Have a great day.